CEO hated sick children until he found triplets crying outside their dying mother's room. The shocking truth about their mother will destroy you. The December wind cut through Manhattan like a blade, but Jonathan Blackstone felt nothing. At 35, he had mastered the art of emotional numbness, wielding it like armor against a world he saw as weak and pathetic. His charcoal Armani suit was pristine, his blonde hair perfectly styled, and his steel-gray eyes reflected the cold calculation that had made him the most feared CEO in the pharmaceutical industry. "Sir, the Metropolitan General Acquisition Papers are ready for your signature," his assistant Marcus whispered as they strode through the hospital's marble lobby. Jonathan's Italian leather shoes clicked against the floor with military precision, each step echoing his absolute authority. Jonathan paused at the elevator, checking his platinum Rolex. "Good. After I sign, triple the prices on all their pediatric cancer medications immediately. These bleeding hearts need to understand that charity doesn't pay for research and development." Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, the orphanage representatives are still calling about the medication discounts. They're saying children will die without access to—" "Let them call," Jonathan interrupted, his voice devoid of emotion. "Blackstone Pharmaceuticals is not a charity organization. We're here to maximize shareholder value, not coddle society's unfortunates." The elevator doors opened, revealing the sterile hospital environment that smelled of disinfectant and desperation. Jonathan had grown up in places like this after his parents died in that car accident when he was 8. His billionaire guardians, Richard and Margaret Blackstone, had molded him into their perfect successor, ruthless, calculating, and completely immune to human suffering. "The lawyers are waiting in conference room B," Marcus continued, reviewing his tablet. "The pediatric wing acquisition should be finalized within the hour. Their research on childhood leukemia treatments could be worth billions once we restructure their pricing model." Jonathan's phone buzzed. Another call from St. Mary's Orphanage. He declined it without hesitation, just as he had the previous 27 calls that week. These institutions seemed to believe that his tragic childhood would make him sympathetic to their cause. They were gravely mistaken, sir. Marcus ventured carefully. The caller ID showed it was about medication for terminal children. Perhaps you should focus on your job instead of playing conscience," Jonathan snapped, his voice sharp enough to cut glass. "I didn't build a pharmaceutical empire by giving away products to every sob story that crosses my desk." As they walked toward the conference room, Jonathan felt the familiar satisfaction of absolute control. In 2 hours, he would own another small company, eliminate their compassionate pricing policies, and add millions to Blackstone's quarterly profits. The fact that children might suffer was irrelevant. Business was business. He had no idea that. In exactly 120 minutes, 3 little girls with auburn curls and desperate tears would shatter his carefully constructed world forever. The Ice Emperor was about to meet his destiny, and nothing would ever be the same again. The hospital's PA system crackled overhead. Code Blue, room 247. Code Blue, room 247. Jonathan barely noticed, already mentally calculating profit margins. His frozen heart was about to melt in ways he never thought possible. The 7th floor corridor buzzed with typical hospital activity until Jonathan encountered an unexpected roadblock. 3 identical little girls, no more than 6 years old, formed a human barrier outside room 247. Their auburn curls cascaded over matching red velvet dresses that showed loving, carefully mended seams, and slightly faded fabric that spoke of countless gentle washes. "You can't go in there," declared the girl in the center, her small frame radiating fierce determination despite tear-swollen eyes. "Nobody else is going to hurt our mama." Jonathan checked his Rolex impatiently. The acquisition meeting was in 15 minutes, and he had no tolerance for childish obstacles. "Move," he commanded with boardroom authority that typically made groan. Executives tremble. Instead of retreating, the lead girl stepped forward, chin raised defiantly. "I'm Scarlett. These are Autumn and Ruby. We're 6, and we're not moving until someone promises our mama will be okay." Autumn clutched a worn stuffed rabbit, her artistic soul evident in eyes too wise for her age. "The doctors won't tell us." "What's happening?" she whispered. Ruby, the smallest, held a crumpled child's drawing of stick figures under a rainbow, watching Jonathan with unsettling intensity. "Our mama is Isabella Grace Summers," Scarlett continued with queenly gravity. "She used to be a nurse before she got sick. She's the best mama in the world." Something cracked in Jonathan's armor of indifference. These children's fierce loyalty felt oddly familiar, stirring a buried memory he'd convinced himself never existed. "I don't have time for this," he said, but his voice lacked its usual commanding edge. "We've been here 3 days," Scarlett shot back, arms crossed. "Nobody's made us leave yet. We promised Mama we'd protect her, and Summers girls keep promises." Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, perhaps the East Corridor." "No," Jonathan surprised himself by saying. Something about their unwavering determination demanded respect. Studied the 3 faces Scarlett's fierce protectiveness, Autumn's gentle soul shining through tears, Ruby's quiet observation that seemed to see through to his heart. "What's wrong with your mother?" he asked, the question escaping unbidden. Autumn stepped forward, voice barely a whisper. "She has the cancer that makes people go to heaven, but we're not ready yet." The devastating honesty hit Jonathan like a physical blow. Staring into 3 pairs of eyes that held more genuine love than he'd ever experienced, something fundamental shifted inside him. "What did you say your mother's name was?" he asked, his voice suddenly hoarse. "Isabella Grace Summers," Scarlett repeated, studying his face with sharp childhood intuition. "Do you know our mama?" The world stopped spinning. That name, a name from 7 years ago, that still haunted his dreams. His legs nearly gave out as the impossible truth crashed over him. Like a tsunami dot, these weren't just any children blocking his path. These were his daughters. The hospital corridor seemed to tilt on its axis as Jonathan stared at the 3 little faces before him. Isabella, Grace Summers. The name echoed in his mind like a death knell, dragging him back to a moment 7 years ago that he'd spent billions trying to forget. "Isabella Grace Parker," he whispered, his voice barely audible. The girls exchanged confused glances at the different surname. "Summers," Scarlett corrected firmly. "Mama took Grandma's name after." She stopped, her 6-year-old instincts telling her she'd said too much. Jonathan's mind raced backward to May 2016. He was 28, heir to the Blackstone pharmaceutical empire, and desperately in love with a nursing student named Isabella Grace Parker. They'd been together 3 blissful years when she came to him with news that should have been the happiest moment of his life. "I'm pregnant," she had whispered in their tiny apartment, her hands trembling as she held the ultrasound image. "Jonathan, we're having triplets." The memory slammed into him with devastating clarity. His initial joy had lasted exactly 47 minutes, until his guardians Richard and Margaret Blackstone arrived at his penthouse with their ultimatum. "She planned this," Margaret had hissed, her perfectly manicured nails clicking against the marble countertop. 3 babies at once? That's not natural. She's trapping you, stealing your inheritance. "Choose," Richard had demanded coldly. "The gold-digging nurse and her bastard children, or your family fortune and future." Under their relentless psychological warfare, Jonathan had made the worst decision of his life. He'd accused Isabella of manipulation, forced her to sign papers, renouncing any claim to child support, and disappeared the day she needed him most. Now, Staring at Scarlett's fierce green eyes, his own eyes, the magnitude of his betrayal crashed over him like a building collapse. "How old are you?" he asked, though he already knew the answer would destroy him. 6 years and 4 months, Ruby spoke for the first time, her voice small but clear. "Mama says we were born in July during the biggest thunderstorm ever. July 2017, exactly 9 months after he'd abandoned Isabella." Autumn tilted her head, studying his face with an artist's attention to detail. "You look sad, mister. Are you sick too? Where is she?" Jonathan's voice cracked. "Where is your mother?" Scarlett pointed to the door behind them. "Room 247. The same room where a code blue had been called minutes earlier." "The doctors say she's really sick," Scarlett explained, her brave facade finally cracking. "They use big words we don't understand, but the nurses cry when they think we're not looking." Jonathan's legs nearly buckled. His Isabella, was dying behind that door, and these 3 perfect little girls were his daughters. Daughters he'd never known existed because he'd been too much of a coward to fight for the woman he loved. "We don't have a daddy," Autumn said matter-of-factly, though tears streamed down her cheeks. "Mama said he went away before we were born, but sometimes I dream about him coming back." The innocent words shattered what remained of Jonathan's heart. Standing in that sterile hospital corridor, surrounded by the 3 most beautiful children he'd ever seen. Jonathan Blackstone, the man who'd built an empire on others, suffering, finally understood the true cost of his choices. His daughters didn't even know his name. Jonathan's hand trembled as he reached for the handle of room 247. The girls stepped aside, sensing something monumental was about to happen. As the door opened, the antiseptic smell of chemotherapy hit him first, followed by a sight that would haunt him forever. Isabella lay in the hospital bed, so drastically changed that he almost didn't recognize her. The vibrant 25-year-old nursing student he'd loved had been replaced by a frail shadow weighing barely 90 pounds. Her once lustrous auburn hair was gone, replaced by a colorful scarf that couldn't hide her baldness. Her skin, once kissed with natural warmth, now appeared translucent and yellowed. But her eyes, those emerald eyes that had captured his heart at first sight, remained unchanged. When they met his, 7 years of pain flashed between them in an instant. "Isabella," he whispered, stepping into the room like a man approaching his own execution. "Jonathan Blackstone," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, but carrying the weight of every broken promise. "I wondered if you'd ever show up. Come to watch me die?" The bitterness in her tone was like acid on his soul. He moved closer, noting the medical charts scattered around her bed, the 4th line snaking into her arms, the monitors tracking her weakening vital signs. "I didn't know," he started, but she cut him off with a laugh that turned into a cough. "Didn't know what? That your daughters existed? Or that I was dying?" Isabella struggled to sit up, her movements painful and labored. "I tried to find you 8 months ago when they diagnosed the ovarian cancer. Stage 4, Jonathan. Do you know what that means?" He did. In his pharmaceutical empire, he'd seen enough medical reports to understand. Stage 4 meant terminal. It meant she was dying, and there was very little time left. "Your guardian's maid." "Sure I could never reach you," Isabella continued, each word requiring visible effort. "Richard and Margaret hired private investigators to block any attempt I made to contact you. They knew about the girls all along." Jonathan felt the blood drain from his face. "What are you saying?" "They've been watching us for 7 years, she whispered, tears streaming down her gaunt cheeks. "Every school play, every birthday party, every milestone. They documented everything while making sure you remained ignorant." The revelation hit him like a physical blow. His guardians hadn't just manipulated him into abandoning Isabella. They'd actively prevented any reconciliation. "The treatment I need," Costs $2.4 million, Isabella said, her voice growing weaker. Funny thing is, it's produced by your company, the ZK-47 Experimental Protocol. The same company that could save my life refuses to offer compassionate pricing. Jonathan's world tilted. His own pharmaceutical empire was denying treatment to the mother of his children, to the woman he'd never stopped loving. "Mama?" Scarlett's small voice came from the doorway. The girls had been listening, their young minds trying to process the complex adult conversation. "Come here, my angels." Isabella managed a weak smile as her daughters approached the bed. This is Jonathan. She struggled with the words. "He's our daddy, isn't he, Mama?" Ruby asked with startling directness. The silence that followed was deafening. Isabella's eyes never left Jonathan's face as she nodded slowly. "Yes, baby, he's your father." 3 pairs of innocent eyes turned to Jonathan with a mixture of hope, confusion, and desperate need. In that moment, looking at the devastation his choices had wrought, Jonathan realized he'd spent 7 years building an empire while his real treasure lay dying in a hospital bed. The ice emperor was melting, and the flood of regret threatened to drown him completely. Heavy footsteps thundered through the hospital corridor as Richard and Margaret Blackstone arrived with their army. Richard, 68, with commanding silver hair, moved like a general claiming territory. Margaret glided beside him in designer armor, her cold eyes already calculating victory. "Jonathan!" Richard's voice boomed across the floor. "Step away from that woman immediately." 6 security guards and 3 lawyers flanked them as they swept into room 247. Margaret surveyed Isabella with pure disgust, her perfectly painted lips curling into a sneer. "Still playing the dying victim, I see," Margaret said coldly. How predictably pathetic. Jonathan positioned himself protectively between his guardians and Isabella's bed. "Get out of here, now." "We're not going anywhere," Richard declared, signaling his lead attorney. "James, show him the court order." The lawyer stepped forward with official documents. "Jonathan Blackstone, by emergency order of New York Superior Court, you are deemed emotionally compromised and unfit to make legal or medical decisions regarding Isabella Summers and her minor children." The words hit Jonathan like physical blows. "That's impossible. We petitioned Judge Morrison this morning," Margaret interrupted with visible satisfaction, "citing your obvious emotional instability and conflict of interest. He agreed you cannot be trusted around this gold-digging manipulator." Isabella struggled to sit up despite her weakness. "Tell him about the $5 million, Margaret. How you offered to pay me to abort his children." Margaret's composed mask cracked, revealing the monster beneath. "Those bastards were never meant to exist. We offered you a generous solution. They're innocent children." Jonathan's voice cracked with rage. "They're obstacles," Richard stated coldly. "Threats to everything we've built. We've protected you from this woman's schemes for 7 years." The lawyer continued reading mechanically. "Any attempt to authorize medical treatments or financial expenditures will result in immediate forfeiture of inheritance and criminal charges for breach of fiduciary duty." The girls pressed closer to their mother's bed, sensing the adult storm raging around them. Scarlett gripped Isabella's hand desperately, while Autumn and Ruby watched their newly discovered father being systematically stripped of power. "You've been watching them," Jonathan said, the full betrayal crystallizing. 7 years of birthdays, school plays, Christmas mornings. You documented every moment while keeping me away." "We documented threats to our legacy," Margaret replied without shame. Richard stepped closer, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "Choose, Jonathan. Your empire or these strangers. Walk away now and keep everything, or stay and lose it all." Security guards moved closer as the legal noose tightened. Jonathan looked at Isabella's ravaged face, then at his 3 daughters, learning that having a father meant nothing if he couldn't protect them. The ice Emperor commanded billions, but was powerless to save the only people who mattered. His family was dying, and he was trapped in a golden prison of his guardian's making. While the adults raged around them, the three little girls displayed a maturity that shattered every heart in the room. Scarlett stepped forward with the gravity of a seasoned diplomat, her small chin raised despite the tears streaming down her cheeks. "We know about the cancer," she announced, her 6-year-old voice carrying weight that silenced the room. "We've known for 4 months." Isabella's face crumpled. "Sweethearts, I tried to protect you. We take care of Mama now," Autumn interrupted softly, clutching her worn stuffed rabbit. "We make her soup when she's too sick to eat, and we give her the medicine when she forgets." Ruby, the quietest of the three, pulled out a crumpled piece of paper from her dress pocket. "I drew this for you, Mama," she whispered, unfolding a Shilma. Child's drawing of 4 stick figures holding hands under a rainbow. "It's our family, but I always wondered who the 4th person was supposed to be." Jonathan's knees nearly buckled as he stared at the innocent artwork. The 4th figure, slightly taller than the others, wore what looked like a tie. Even in her subconscious, Ruby had been drawing her missing father. "We pray every night," Scarlett continued, her fierce protectiveness evident even through her vulnerability. "Ruby prays to God to send our daddy from heaven. Autumn prays for Mama to get better. I pray for someone strong enough to help us." Margaret scoffed from across the room. How touching. 3 little actresses putting on quite a performance. Scarlett whirled around with shocking fury. "We're not acting. Our Mama is dying, and we don't know what's going to happen to us." The raw honesty in her voice cut through every adult pretense in the room. These weren't pawns in a corporate game. They were 3 terrified children watching their world collapse. Autumn approached Jonathan with artistic intuition that seemed to see straight through to his soul. "Are you really our daddy?" she asked simply. "Because you have the same eyes as us, and you look like the man I draw in my pictures sometimes." Jonathan knelt down to her eye level, his voice barely a whisper. "Yes, sweetheart, I'm your father." "Then why didn't you come before?" Ruby asked with devastating innocence. "Didn't you want us?" The question hung in the air like a death sentence. Jonathan looked into 3 pairs of eyes that held more genuine love and forgiveness than he'd experienced in his entire adult life. "I made terrible mistakes," he said, his voice breaking. "I was scared and stupid, and I hurt the most important people in my life." Scarlett studied his face with the sharp intuition only children possess. "But you're here now," she said matter-of-factly. "And Mama always says it's never too late to do the right thing." From her hospital bed, Isabella watched the scene with a mixture of heartbreak and wonder. Despite everything, despite years of abandonment and struggle, her daughters were offering their father the grace he didn't deserve. "We forgive you, Daddy," Autumn said simply, reaching out to take his hand. "But can you please save our Mama now?" In that moment, surrounded by 3 pure hearts who loved unconditionally, Jonathan Blackstone finally understood what he'd been fighting for his entire life. Not money, not power, not corporate dominance. Family, love, the chance to be the father these incredible little girls deserved. The ice, Emperor's heart, didn't just crack, it shattered completely. And from the pieces, something entirely new began to grow. Dr. Marcus Chun, the hospital's lead oncologist, delivered the devastating news with clinical precision that cut like surgical steel. Isabella has 72 hours at most without immediate intervention. The ZK-47 experimental protocol is her only hope. Jonathan's blood turned to ice. ZK-470, revolutionary cancer treatment developed by his own Blackstone Pharmaceuticals. The cruel irony wasn't lost on him. His company held the key to saving Isabella's life. The treatment requires immediate family authorization and full payment of $2.4 million. Dr. Chun continued, glancing nervously at the legal documents Richard's lawyers had presented. However, given the court order, "I'm authorizing it now," Jonathan declared, pulling out his phone to call his corporate accounts. "Sir, you legally cannot," James the lawyer interjected smoothly. "Any financial commitment you make will be considered breach of the restraining order." Richard stepped forward with predatory satisfaction. "Even if you could authorize payment, the drug requires family consent. Since you're deemed unfit and Isabella is unconscious half the time, there's no legal pathway forward." Jonathan felt the walls closing in. His own empire built on his sweat and ambition was being used as a weapon against him. "There has to be something. Actually," Dr. Chun said quietly, "there might be one option. If the biological father could prove paternity and demonstrate emotional stability, the court might—" "Absolutely not," Margaret interrupted sharply. "We'll tie up any paternity proceedings in litigation for months. That woman will be dead long before any results come." Back, the girls huddled closer to their mother's bedside, their young minds struggling to understand why adults were arguing about money while their mama lay dying. Scarlett's small hand gripped Isabella's with desperate intensity. "Why won't they just help her?" Autumn whispered to Ruby, tears streaming down both their faces. Jonathan pulled Dr. Chun aside, his voice urgent and desperate. "What exactly does the ZK-47 protocol involve?" 12 hours of intensive chemotherapy, followed by experimental immunotherapy treatments. The success rate for stage 4 ovarian cancer is 60%, not great odds, but infinitely better than what she faces without it. "And if we wait?" Dr. Chun's expression said everything. "Organ failure will begin within 48 hours. After that, even ZK-47 won't help." Jonathan turned back to face his guardians, his mind racing through legal possibilities. "I'll find a way around your court order. Try it," Richard said coldly. "We've already contacted Judge Morrison. Any attempt to circumvent today's ruling will result in immediate criminal charges and complete forfeiture of your inheritance." Margaret smiled with vicious satisfaction. "Face reality, Jonathan. You can't save her. You couldn't save her 7 years ago, and you can't save her now." From her hospital bed, Isabella stirred slightly, her weak voice barely audible. "Jonathan," she whispered, "don't let them win. Not again." Her words hit him like lightning. 7 years ago, he'd let Richard and Margaret manipulate him into abandoning the woman he loved. Now they were using the same tactics to ensure her death. The girls looked up at him with desperate hope, 3 pairs of green eyes that mirrored his own. Scarlett spoke for all of them. "Please, Daddy, you're the only one who can save her." Standing in that sterile hospital room, surrounded by legal barriers and corporate politics, Jonathan realized he had a choice to make. He could preserve his empire and watch his family die, or he could risk everything for love. The clock was ticking. 72 hours to save Isabella's life. The Ice Emperor was about to declare war on his own kingdom. The hospital room faded as Jonathan's mind spiraled back to October 2013. He was 26, arrogant heir to a pharmaceutical empire, when he walked into Café Luna near Metropolitan General Hospital and saw her. Isabella Grace Parker, 23, sat alone at a corner table, her auburn curls catching the afternoon sunlight as she studied nursing textbooks with fierce concentration out there. Eyes met across the crowded cafe, and Jonathan felt something he'd never experienced: love at first sight. She was beautiful, yes, but more than that, she radiated a warmth that drew him like a moth to flame. "Excuse me," he'd said, approaching her table with uncharacteristic nervousness. "I'm Jonathan. You look like you're drowning in medical terminology." Isabella looked up with those emerald eyes that would haunt his dreams for years. "I'm Isabella. And yes, Pharmacology is trying to kill me." For 3 magical years, they were inseparable. Jonathan discovered someone who loved him for who he was, not what he owned. Isabella saw past his wealth to the lonely boy inside who'd lost his parents at 8. She wanted to work with sick children, to heal and nurture. He wanted to build an empire. Somehow, their dreams aligned perfectly. May 15th, 2016. The date burned in his memory like a brand. Isabella had been quiet all week, and Jonathan feared she was growing tired of his corporate obsessions. Then she showed up at his penthouse with tears in her eyes and an ultrasound image in her trembling hands. "I'm pregnant," she whispered, her voice a mixture of joy and terror. "Jonathan, we're having triplets." His initial reaction was pure ecstasy. Triplets. 3 little versions of the woman he adored. He spun her around the living room, both of them laughing and crying simultaneously. "We'll get married immediately," he declared, already planning their future. "The babies will have everything, the best schools, the best doctors, the best life possible." But his joy lasted exactly 47 minutes. Richard and Margaret arrived like avenging demons, their faces masks of cold fury. "She planned this," Margaret hissed, examining the ultrasound with disgust. 3 babies at once? That's not natural. She's using fertility drugs to trap you." "Think, Jonathan," Richard demanded. "A nursing student getting pregnant with triplets. Just as you're about to inherit everything? This is calculated manipulation." Under their relentless psychological assault, doubt crept into Jonathan's mind like poison. Isabella had been asking about his inheritance lately. She had seemed excited about his promotion to VP. Was it possible? The worst part wasn't that he believed their lies, it was that he let fear make the choice for him. Fear of responsibility, fear of being manipulated, fear of losing the empire that defined him. "I can't do this," he told Isabella the next morning, his words cutting through. Her heart like daggers. "I think you planned this pregnancy to trap me. I'm not ready to be a father, and I'm not sure I ever will be." Isabella's face crumpled as if he'd physically struck her. "Jonathan, I love you." "These babies. Sign these papers," he interrupted, sliding legal documents across the table. "They waive any claim to child support or inheritance. If you really love me, you'll let me go." The memory of her signing those papers with shaking hands, tears streaming down her face, still woke Jonathan in cold sweats. He'd watched the strongest woman he knew break into pieces, and he'd been the one holding the hammer. "I'll raise them alone," she'd whispered, one hand protectively covering her still flat stomach. "And they'll never know their father abandoned them." That was the last time he saw her, until today, not now. Standing in room 247, Jonathan understood the magnitude of his betrayal. Isabella had kept her word. She'd raised 3 extraordinary daughters alone while he built his empire on the foundation of their destroyed love. The saddest part was that he'd never stopped loving her. Not for a single day in 7 years. Now she was dying, and it might be too late for redemption. Jonathan made his decision in the hospital elevator, riding down to the main floor where Blackstone Pharmaceuticals' emergency board meeting was about to begin. Richard and Margaret had called the session to officially remove him from power, but Jonathan had other plans. The boardroom buzzed with tension as shareholders connected via video conference from around the world. Richard sat at the head of the mahogany table like a king ready to execute his heir, while Margaret arranged documents with predatory precision. "Ladies and gentlemen," Richard began, his voice carrying absolute authority, "we're here to discuss Jonathan's recent emotional breakdown and his unfitness to lead this company." Jonathan burst through the doors with the fury of a man who'd lost everything that mattered. "Actually, we're here to discuss 7 years of lies, manipulation, and corporate fraud." The room fell silent as Jonathan approached the podium, his presence commanding attention from every screen and seat. I have 3 daughters, he announced, his voice carrying across continents. 3 beautiful girls who've been hidden from me by the very people who claim to love me. Richard's face darkened. Jonathan, you're having a nervous breakdown. I'm having a revelation, Jonathan interrupted, producing documents from his briefcase. In 2018, when I turned 30, I quietly transferred 51% of Blackstone Pharmaceuticals to a personal account. I never trusted you completely, Uncle Richard. Margaret's perfectly composed. Mask cracked. That's impossible. I've been the majority shareholder for 7 years, Jonathan continued, his voice growing stronger. Every decision you've made, every manipulation, every lie, it ends now. He turned to face the camera broadcasting to investors worldwide. The woman I love is dying upstairs, and my own company is denying her the treatment that could save her life. Today, that changes everything. Richard shot to his feet. You're throwing away billions for a gold digger and her bastard children. Those bastard children are your great nieces, Jonathan roared, his voice echoing through the room. And that gold digger is the only woman I've ever loved. He pulled out his phone and authorized an immediate transfer. I'm restructuring our entire pricing model. Essential medications will now be sold at cost. ZK-47 will be provided free to any patient who needs it. The shareholders erupted in shocked murmurs as stock prices began plummeting in real time. Jonathan didn't care. Money had never brought him happiness, only isolation and regret. Furthermore, he continued, I'm creating a $500 million fund for free cancer treatments. Richard and Margaret Blackstone are hereby terminated from all positions, effective immediately. Margaret's composure finally shattered completely. You ungrateful child. We saved you from that scheming witch. You stole 7 years of my daughters' lives, Jonathan replied coldly. Security will escort you from the building. You're no longer welcome in my company or my life. As his guardians were led away in disgrace, Jonathan felt a weight lift from his shoulders that he'd carried since childhood. The empire was his, but more importantly, he was finally free to save his family. Racing back to the elevator, he called Dr. Chun. Authorize the ZK-47 protocol immediately. Full treatment? Best care available? Money is no object. Sir, the court order is now irrelevant. I just bought my freedom. The Ice Emperor had declared war on his own kingdom and won. Now came the hardest battle of all, earning forgiveness from the family he'd abandoned. While the adults waged war in boardrooms and courthouses, the 3 little girls showed strength that humbled every nurse on the 7th floor. Scarlet had organized her sisters into shifts, creating a schedule written in purple crayon that hung beside their mothers. Bed. Autumn watches Mama from 6 to 10, Scarlet explained to Dr. Chun with the seriousness of a military commander. Ruby sings to her from 10 to 2, and I take care of medicine time and scary moments. The sight of 6-year-olds taking on such responsibility broke hearts throughout the hospital. Autumn had covered the sterile walls with drawing stick. Figures of their family holding hands, rainbows arching over houses with too many windows, and endless pictures of mothers and daughters together. I draw our memories, Autumn explained to a tearful nurse. So Mama won't forget us if she goes to sleep for too long. Ruby had appointed herself the family's spiritual guardian, kneeling beside Isabella's bed with hands clasped in prayer. Dear God, she whispered, please don't take our Mama yet. We still need her to teach us how to braid hair and make pancakes. When security guards hired by Richard tried to remove the girls from the hospital, claiming they were disrupting medical procedures, Scarlet's fierce protectiveness exploded into action. We're not leaving, she declared, wrapping her small arms around the bed rail. Mama needs us, and we promised we'd never leave her alone. Autumn and Ruby immediately followed their sister's lead, the three of them forming a human chain around Isabella's bed. Their defiant tears and desperate cries echoed through the corridor, causing other patients and families to emerge from their rooms. "These babies are protecting their dying mother," shouted Mrs. Rodriguez from room 243. "What kind of monsters try to separate children from their mama?" Within minutes, the entire floor erupted in support of the triplets. Patients in wheelchairs, families dealing with their own tragedies, and off-duty medical staff created a protective circle around room 247. A nurse quickly filmed the scene on her phone. Three little girls in matching red dresses, clinging to their mother's bedside while armed guards loomed over them. The video went viral within hours, generating millions of views and overwhelming public outrage. Hashtag Save the Summers Girls began trending nationwide as celebrities, politicians, and ordinary citizens demanded justice for the family. Talk show hosts condemned the heartless corporation trying to separate dying mothers from their children. Dr. Chan found the girls later that evening, still maintaining their vigil. Isabella had been unconscious for 6 hours, but the triplets refused to leave her side. "Are you angels?" Ruby asked the doctor with innocent curiosity. "Because you're trying to save our mama like angels do." "No, sweetheart," Dr. Chun replied, his voice thick with emotion. "You three are the angels. You're keeping your mother alive with your love." Scarlett looked up with eyes far too wise for her age. "We're not giving up on her. Summers girls never give up on family." As news crews gathered outside the hospital and the nation watched their story unfold, the three little angels continued their quiet battle against despair. They didn't understand corporate politics or legal battles. They only knew that love meant never abandoning the people who needed you most. Their father was learning the same lesson, one heart-wrenching moment at a time. The federal courthouse erupted in chaos as Judge Patricia Williams delivered her emergency ruling. The previous restraining order is hereby dissolved. Jonathan Blackstone is restored to full legal authority regarding his biological children and their mother. Jonathan's heart pounded as he raced back to Metropolitan General, clutching the court documents that had cost him 48 hours of desperate legal warfare. Behind him, reporters and cameras followed the story that had captivated the nation. "Dr. Chun." Jonathan burst into the ICU, his voice echoing through the sterile corridors. "Authorize ZK-47 immediately. Full protocol, best medical team available." "Doctor." Chun looked up from Isabella's chart, his expression grave. "Mr. Blackstone, I have to be honest, her condition has deteriorated significantly. We're looking at maybe 6 hours before organ failure begins." "Then we start now," Jonathan declared, his hands shaking as he signed authorization after authorization. "Whatever it takes, whatever it costs, save her." The medical team sprang into action with precision that took Jonathan's breath away. 4 lines were established, experimental medications prepared, and Isabella was prepped for the most advanced cancer treatment available on Earth. Meanwhile, Jonathan made another revolutionary decision. He pulled out his phone and addressed his corporate board via emergency conference call. Effective immediately, Blackstone Pharmaceuticals will restructure all pricing for life-saving medications, he announced, his voice carrying to shareholders around the world. Essential drugs will be sold at manufacturing cost. I'm also establishing a $500 million fund for free cancer treatments. The financial markets reacted instantly. Blackstone stock plummeted as investors realized their profit. Margins had just evaporated. Jonathan watched billions disappear from his net worth without a flicker of concern. "Sir," his panicked CFO called from New York, "this decision will cost the company nearly $2 billion in projected profits over the next 5 years." "Good," Jonathan replied simply. "Money I earned from people suffering was never really mine." Anyway, in room 247, The triplets watched their father sign papers that would save their mother's life. Scarlett approached him with cautious hope, her small hand slipping into his much larger one. "Are you really going to make Mama better?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Jonathan knelt down to her eye level, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm going to try, sweetheart. I'm going to fight harder than I've ever fought for anything." Autumn and Ruby joined their sister, and for the first time in 7 years, Jonathan felt his daughter's arms around him. Their small bodies pressed against his chest, offering him forgiveness he'd never thought possible. "We knew you'd come back," Ruby whispered against his shoulder. "I dreamed about it every night." As the ZK-47 treatment began flowing into Isabella's veins, Jonathan held his daughters close and watched medical miracles unfold before his eyes. The most advanced cancer therapy in the world was fighting for the woman he'd never stopped loving. Ice Emperor had sacrificed his empire for love, and finally understood that some victories could only be won by surrendering everything else that didn't matter. For the first time in 7 years, Jonathan Blackstone felt truly wealthy. 72 hours after the ZK-47 treatment began, Dr. Chun entered room 247 with news that made Jonathan's heart skip. "Her vital signs are stabilizing. The nausea has stopped, and her white blood cell count is responding positively." Isabella opened her eyes for the first time in 2 days, her voice weak but clear. "Jonathan?" she whispered, turning her head toward the chair where he'd maintained a constant vigil. "I'm here," he said, taking her hand gently. "We're all here." The triplets, who had been sleeping curled up in makeshift beds beside their mother, immediately stirred at the sound of her voice. Scarlett was the first to reach the bedside, her small face lighting up with pure joy. "Mama, you're awake," she exclaimed, careful not to disturb the 4 lines as she hugged. Isabella's arm-got Jonathan had transformed the sterile hospital room into a temporary home. Toys filled every corner. Autumn's artwork decorated the walls, and a small keyboard sat by the window where Ruby practiced the songs Isabella had taught her. He'd moved into the room completely, sleeping in an uncomfortable chair and eating hospital cafeteria food without complaint. Over the following weeks, he learned about each daughter's unique personality. Scarlett, the natural leader, announced she wanted to be a doctor like Daddy's company makes medicine. Autumn showed him dozens of compositions she'd written, songs about families finding each other and love conquering everything bad. Ruby collected smooth stones from the hospital garden, each one representing someone she loved. "This one is you, Daddy," she said, placing a particularly beautiful quartz crystal in his palm. It was lost in the dirt, but now it's clean and shiny. Jonathan's transformation was evident to everyone who knew him. The man who once fired employees via email now spent hours helping Scarlett with first-grade math problems, discovering he was hopeless at addition, but excellent at reading bedtime stories. "Harry Potter has nothing on my girls," he told Isabella one evening as they watched their daughters sleep peacefully in their makeshift beds. "They're the real magic in this world." Isabella's strength returned gradually. Her appetite improved, allowing her to eat real meals instead of surviving on 4 nutrition. Most remarkably, her hair began growing back in soft, golden curls that the girls loved to touch. "You sacrificed everything for us," Isabella said quietly one night after the girls were asleep. "Your empire, your fortune. Why?" Jonathan looked at her with eyes that held 7 years of regret and newfound wisdom. "I spent 35 years building walls around my heart. You and our daughters tore them down in a single day. I finally understand what real wealth looks like." Isabella studied his face, searching for traces of the cold, calculating man who had abandoned her. Instead, she found someone entirely new: a father who cried during school plays, a man who donated billions to help strangers, a partner who hadn't left her side during the darkest moments of her life. "The girls need stability," she said carefully. "They need to know this isn't temporary." "It's not," Jonathan replied with absolute certainty. "I'm never leaving again. I can't undo the past, but I can spend the rest of my life making up for it." Dr. Chun's evening rounds brought more encouraging news. Isabella's cancer markers have dropped 40%. If this trend continues, we're looking at a complete remission. As he spoke, the three little girls slept peacefully, finally secure, in the knowledge that their family was whole. The Ice Emperor had melted completely, replaced by a man who understood that love was the only currency that truly mattered. 3 months later, Dr. Chun delivered the words that changed everything. "Isabella, you're officially in complete remission. The cancer is gone." The hospital room erupted in celebration as the triplets screamed with joy, their voices echoing through the corridors. Isabella burst into tears, not of sorrow, but of overwhelming relief and gratitude. Jonathan wrapped his arms around his. Family, finally allowing himself to believe in miracles. "We did it, Mama," Scarlett declared, climbing onto the hospital bed carefully. "We beat the scary sickness." Isabella's recovery was remarkable. Her strength returned steadily, along with her natural beauty. Golden curls grew back thicker than before, framing a face that regained its healthy glow. The girls took turns brushing their mother's hair each morning, marveling at how soft and beautiful it had become. Jonathan discovered the challenging art of single-handed parenting as Isabella rebuilt her strength. He quickly learned that 6-year-olds were far more demanding than corporate boards. "Daddy, you're doing my math homework wrong," Scarlett informed him with exaggerated patience, erasing his work for the 3rd time. 7 plus 5 is 12, not 11. Jonathan stared at the elementary worksheet in defeat. "I can calculate billion-dollar mergers, but first-grade addition is defeating me." Autumn became his salvation during homework sessions, patiently explaining concepts he'd forgotten since childhood. "It's okay, Daddy," she said, patting his hand consolingly. "Everyone learns at different speeds." Evenings were magical. Jonathan, read Harry Potter aloud while the girls curled around Isabella on her hospital bed, their small faces rapt with attention. His voice cracked during emotional scenes, causing Ruby to pat his arm sympathetically. "It's okay to cry at books, Daddy," she whispered. "Mama cries at the good parts, too." Isabella watched these interactions with growing amazement. The cold, calculating businessman had been replaced by a devoted father who attended every school event via video call, celebrated lost teeth like major holidays, and learned to braid hair through YouTube tutorials. "You're different," she told him one evening as they watched their daughters sleep. "Not just your actions, you, fundamentally." Jonathan nodded, his gaze never leaving his children's peaceful faces. "Losing you the first time nearly destroyed me. I spent 7 years building walls to avoid that pain. But watching you almost die while knowing I caused it, that broke something in me that needed breaking." Isabella's defenses, carefully constructed over years of single motherhood, began cracking. She'd prepared for Jonathan to eventually return to his old patterns, to choose business over family when the novelty wore off. Instead, he'd completely restructured his life around theirs. "The girls are thriving," she admitted quietly. Scarlett's confidence has tripled since having a father figure. Autumn writes songs about complete families now. And Ruby, Isabella smiled softly. "Ruby hasn't had a nightmare in weeks. What about you?" Jonathan asked, his voice careful and hopeful. "Are you thriving?" Isabella looked at the man who'd broken her heart, but had spent months rebuilding it piece by piece. "I'm learning to trust again. It's terrifying and wonderful simultaneously." That night, after the girls were asleep, Isabella made a decision that surprised them both. She reached for Jonathan's hand, intertwining their fingers for the first time in 7 years. "Thank you," she whispered. For fighting for us, for changing, for proving that people really can become better. Jonathan brought her hand to his lips, pressing the gentlest kiss to her knuckles. Thank you for letting me try. Outside their window, snow began falling softly over the city, blanketing the world in pristine white. Inside room 247, a family was healing together, one precious moment at a time. The foundation of their love, once shattered beyond recognition, was finally being rebuilt stronger and more beautiful than ever before. 1 year after Isabella's remission, Jonathan planned something that would either heal their family completely or break his heart forever. He chose the hospital garden where he'd first seen his daughters, the place where his life had truly begun. Why are we having a picnic at the hospital, Daddy? Ruby asked as Jonathan spread blankets under the oak tree where the girls used to play during their mother's treatment. Because this is where our family found each other, he replied, his voice thick with emotion. Isabella arrived wearing a simple blue dress, her golden curls catching the afternoon sunlight. She looked radiant, healthy, strong, and more beautiful than ever. The girls ran to her with squeals of delight, their matching sundresses fluttering in the gentle breeze. Dr. Chun and several nurses who had become like family joined them, along with reporters who had followed their story from the beginning. The nation had watched the Summers family's journey from desperation to hope, and now everyone waited to see how their story would continue. Isabella, Jonathan began, his hands trembling as he stood before the woman who had given him everything meaningful in his life. 1 year ago, I was a man who had lost his soul to greed and fear. You and our daughters gave me back my humanity. The girls watched with wide eyes as their father dropped to one knee, pulling out a ring box that had waited 7 years to fulfill its purpose. This is the same ring I bought in 2016, he said, his voice breaking with emotion. I was too much of a coward to give it to you then, too blinded by other people's poison to see that you are offering me the greatest treasure in the world. Isabella's hands flew to her mouth as tears streamed down her cheeks. Isabella Grace Summers, you've raised 3 extraordinary daughters who taught me what unconditional love looks like. You survived cancer with grace that humbled me. You forgave me when I didn't deserve forgiveness. Jonathan's voice cracked completely. Will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life proving that I'm worthy of you and our girls? Say, yes, Mama, Scarlett shouted, bouncing on her toes. Say yes. Autumn and Ruby joined in, their voices creating a chorus of pure joy. Say yes. Say yes. Isabella looked down at the man who had broken her heart, but had spent a year rebuilding it with infinite patience and love. The ring sparkled in the sunlight, a promise delayed but not forgotten. Yes, she whispered, then louder, yes, Jonathan. I'll marry you. The garden erupted in celebration as Jonathan slipped the ring onto her finger. The girls cheered so loudly that patients in nearby rooms came to their windows to see what was happening. Autumn had secretly coordinated with the hospital staff, and suddenly rose petals began falling from the upper floors like gentle rain. Ruby started singing a song she'd composed about families, her sweet voice carrying across the garden dot, as Jonathan kissed his fiancée for the first time in 7 years, surrounded by their daughters and the medical team that had saved their lives. He understood that some stories don't end, they begin again. The Ice Emperor was gone forever, replaced by a man who had learned that the greatest riches couldn't be counted in dollars, but in moments like this, moments filled with laughter, tears, and the kind of love that conquers everything. Their second chance had finally arrived, and this time, nothing would tear them apart. 2 years later, June 2025, the Malibu beach house stood like a dream against the Pacific horizon, its windows reflecting the endless blue sky that Ruby had wished for when she said she wanted to live where heaven meets the ocean. Jonathan stood on the wraparound deck, watching his daughters play in the sand below. At 8 years old, the triplets had blossomed into confident, joyful children who knew they were deeply loved. Scarlett fearlessly rode the waves on her junior surfboard, her natural leadership evident as she coached her sisters. Autumn preferred collecting seashells for her art projects, though she tried surfing to make her father proud. Ruby had discovered she was afraid of big waves, but loved building elaborate sand castles with Jonathan's help. "Daddy, come help us," Ruby called, her voice carrying on the ocean breeze. "Our castle needs a moat." Isabella emerged from the house, 6 months pregnant with twins and glowing with contentment. She'd completed her pediatric oncology specialization and now directed the Isabella Summers Children's Hospital, a state-of-the-art facility Jonathan had built in her honor. "How are James and Grace today?" Jonathan asked, gently placing his hands on her rounded belly. "Active," Isabella laughed, covering his hands with hers. "I think they're excited to meet their big sisters." The transformation of Jonathan's life was complete. Blackstone Pharmaceuticals had become a humanitarian organization, developing life-saving medications and distributing them at cost worldwide. The company was worth less financially, but had saved millions of lives, legacy that made Jonathan infinitely prouder than any profit margin ever had. Richard and Margaret Blackstone lived in bitter isolation, their cruelty having cost them the only family they had. Jonathan felt no anger toward them anymore, only pity for people who had chosen money over love. "Daddy." Scarlett ran up from the beach, her hair wild with salt and wind. "Are you happy now? Really, truly happy?" Jonathan knelt down, pulling all 3 girls into his arms as Isabella joined them. The sunset painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, creating a backdrop that seemed designed for this perfect moment. "Sweetheart," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I was lost for 35 years until you 3 found me. I thought I was successful, but I was just empty. Now I have everything that matters." Autumn looked up at him with her artist's intuition. "You were like the broken shells on the beach before we came. But love made you whole again." Ruby nodded solemnly. "And now we're a real family forever and ever." Isabella kissed the top of Jonathan's head as he held their daughters. "Forever and ever," she agreed softly, as the Pacific sunset painted there. Whirled in gold, the Blackstone Summers family sat together on the sand, watching the waves roll endlessly toward shore. Jonathan had learned that the richest man in the world wasn't the one with the most money. It was the one with the most love. The ice emperor was gone, melted away by 3 little girls who had taught him that family wasn't something you inherited or built. It was something you chose every single day with every beat of your heart. Looking at his daughters' faces, glowing in the sunset light, Jonathan finally understood what home meant. It wasn't a place or a building, it was wherever his family was. Safe and together and loved, the waves whispered against the shore, carrying away the last traces of his old life and bringing in something infinitely better, a future filled with laughter, love, and the kind of wealth that could never be lost or stolen. Forever had finally begun.